Hello everyone. Today we are going to start looking at solving some of these quadratic equations. So if we look at our warm-up here, we want to know how many solutions does each equation have and what are they? So if we're looking at this first equation here, we have x squared equals 9. So we're kind of thinking, what can I multiply together to give me 9? And it has to be the same number. So we could have 3 times 3 to give me 9, or we could also have negative 3 times negative 3 to give me 9. So that means my answers here would be x equals 3 and negative 3. So I would have both of those numbers as solutions. For number 2, we're looking for two things that we can multiply. A number that's the same, we can multiply by itself to give us 0. So here there's only one option. The only way to get 0 is if we do 0 times 0. So here x has to equal 0, okay? And that's because we're talking about x squared, okay? So remember, x squared is x times x, so we have to be using the same number in both of those places. That's why we can only do 0 times 0, okay? Number 3, we have x minus 1 equals 3, or x squared minus 1 equals 3. Well, if I move this 1 over to the other side, we would add it. So really what we're doing is saying x squared equals 4. Well, how can I get 4 if I multiply a number by itself? We could do 2 times 2 or negative 2 times 2. So here x could equal 2 or negative 2. Okay? For number 4, again, we can kind of think about 2 times something squared gives me 50. If we want to get rid of that 2, we could divide by 2. Then we have x squared equals 25. Well, what number times itself gives us 25? 5 times 5, or negative 5 times negative 5. So that means x equals 5 or negative 5. Okay? Now for number 5, we still have two things being multiplied together, but we have the first thing is x plus 1, and the second thing is x plus 1. So that means I want those parentheses to give me 0. So the only way to get these whole parentheses to be 0 is if x is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 1 gives me 0. Negative 1 plus 1 equals 0. 0 times 0 gives me 0. Okay, so here x has to equal negative 1. All right? And we'll get into solving these a little bit more and like where these are coming from. Okay, so if you want to try 6 and 7, go ahead. I'll give you the answers, but we're going to talk about solving them in the next couple of days. So number 6, x either equals 0 or 6. And number 7, x equals negative 1 or 3. Okay, so don't worry too much about these right now. But if you did try them and found those answers, that's what they would be. Okay? One thing I do want to talk about, if you could make a note on the side of your paper, is there are 3 different types of solutions we could have in terms of a quadratic, okay? Some of them we've already seen, like with number 5 here, we only had one number, x equals negative 1. So if we were thinking about that in terms of a graph, we would have negative 1 right here, and my graph would just touch that point and then go up. So we would have only one x-intercept, which means we would have one solution. Okay, in this case it would be negative 1. The other option we could have, like we did with a couple of these, was 2 numbers. So for number 1, we had 3 and negative 3, or number 3, we had 2, negative 2, 5, negative 5, those types of things. So if you have 2 solutions, your graph would hit the x-axis twice. Okay, and it could open up or down, but you would have 2 x-intercepts, meaning you have 2 solutions. And then lastly, just as we've had in units past. We could have no solution as well, which just means we don't touch the x-axis at all, and that would be no solution. So those are our three options and what they would look like in terms of a graph, which again, we'll be talking about a lot more throughout this unit. Okay, so we're gonna go through now actually solving these and finding the solutions. So what we wanna do is look in our equation and we need to isolate our variable just like we did back in unit 2. So here my variable is n and it has that power of 2. So that is what we want to isolate first. So that means I need to get rid of the plus 4. If you like, you can draw the line through your equal sign. And how do I cancel plus 4? We would minus 4. Those will cancel on the left, and I can subtract 4 on this side. So now I have n squared equals 400. All right, now for us to be able to solve this, we need to get rid of this power of 2. Okay, we have to get rid of this little exponent here. And the way that we do that is by taking the square root. So that's going to look like this on both sides. That square root is going to cancel the power of 2. So that way on this left side, we only have n left over. But what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I'm going to square root 400 as well. Okay, and we can go ahead and use our calculator for that. So on our calculator, we are going to, let me make that a little bit bigger. Okay. Oops. We are going to use our square root button, which is right over here on that square button that we used last unit. So right here, it's in blue. So we're gonna have to hit our second key and then press this button here. So we're gonna hit second, and then that square root key, and then type in 400 and hit enter. So that gives me 20, okay? Now your calculator is only going to give you the positive answer, okay? So we know 20 times 20 equals 400, but we are going to be responsible for coming up with the negative as well. So we need to know that we also need negative 20 times negative 20 because that also gives us 400 as an answer. So that means my two answers here would be 20 and negative 20. Okay. If we look at number 2, we can draw that line in. Again, we have to get n squared alone, so we need to get rid of this 3, which is being multiplied to n squared. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Okay, we can go ahead and use our calculator here. And we have 432 divided by 3. That gives me 144. So I have 144 equals n squared. Now we are at that point again to take the square root of both sides. The square root will cancel the square on the right. So we just have n, which is what we want. We can go back to our calculator and do square root. 144 gives me 12. So we have 12 and negative 12. We have to write down the positive and the negative for that answer. Okay? Now, if we're looking at number 3 is slightly different because our variable is inside our parentheses here, but the whole thing here is being squared. So what we really need to do is isolate whatever is being raised to the power of 2. So this is what's being squared. There's nothing else outside of it. So we can just go ahead and start with square rooting to get rid of these parentheses here. That way I can get to that variable. Okay, so we're going to square root both sides. And we know the square root of 144 is 12 and negative 12. We just got that from number 2. So what's going to happen, because we still have an expression here, we are going to get two equations. We're either going to get n plus 1 equals 12, or we have n plus 1 equals negative 12, okay? Now these are just one-step equations that I can solve. So we can subtract 1 to cancel. So we either get n equals 11, or the other side we're going to subtract 1 as well. But now we have negative 12 minus 1, which gives us negative 13. So those are my two answers. So we are trying to isolate whatever is being squared. In those first two examples, it was the variable, right? We had n squared for both of those, so that's what we were trying to get alone. Here it was the whole expression. So you can always go through with a highlighter and highlight whatever you're trying to isolate. And that's exactly what I'm going to do for number 4. So we want to look at what is being squared. N minus 5 is what's being squared, okay? That means that's what I need to isolate. So I'm going to draw that line down the equal sign. First, I need to get rid of this 30, then we can square root to get rid of the square. So first we can add 30, that will cancel there. Add 30 on the right side, so now I have n minus 5 squared equals 100. Now that I have what's being squared by itself, we can square root to cancel that power of 2, and then we can square root the 100 as well. Bring my calculator back down here, and we can go ahead and enter square root 100 equals 10. Okay, now we do have this expression here, so we know that we either get n minus 5 equals 10, or n minus 5 equals negative 10. We still need that positive and negative. Don't forget that part. So to solve this, we would add 5. So n equals 15. That's my first answer. Or solve the same way over here, plus 5, but now we have n equals negative 5. Okay, because here we had 10 plus 5, which is 15. Here we have negative 5 plus 10, which is negative 5. So be very careful when you're solving these. It can be a little tricky, all right? So that is how we solve those with our square roots. And that is it for today, so make sure to write down any questions that you have, and we'll be doing more of this in our next lesson as well.